Hey everyone, and a massive welcome back to the channel. Seriously, wherever you are in the world right now, thanks for clicking on this one. Before we dive deep into one of history's most complicated and often misunderstood topics, sending you all huge virtual hugs and wishing you nothing but fantastic health and positive vibes. Stay safe out there. Okay, let's jump in. Picture this. Huge armies marching thousands of miles under blazing desert suns, knights wearing crosses on their chests, epic battles around ancient holy cities, kings and emperors clashing. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? That's the classic image of the Crusades. For centuries, we've been told a simple story: brave Christian warriors from Europe answering the Pope's call to heroically rescue Jerusalem from Muslim control. But what if I told you that story barely scratches the surface? What if the real reasons thousands left everything behind, fought, and died were way messier, way more complicated, and involved a lot less holiness and a lot more, well, money, land, power, adventure, and even sheer desperation? Stick with me, because we're about to peel back the layers of myth and propaganda to explore what the Crusades were really about, and how this explosive collision of worlds changed everything forever. To understand why the Crusades even started, we need to step back into Europe around the year 1095. Life was tough. Wars between local lords were constant. Famines hit hard. Land was scarce, especially for younger sons of nobles who wouldn't inherit their father's estates. The church was incredibly powerful, but also worried. Then, Pope Urban II gave a speech that lit a fire. He called on Christian knights to stop fighting each other and instead journey east to help their fellow Christians in the Byzantine Empire, centered on Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, who were under pressure from Seljuk Turks. More dramatically, he called for them to liberate Jerusalem, the city where Jesus lived, died, and was believed to have risen, which had been under Muslim rule for centuries. He promised something huge: remission of sins. Essentially, if you fought and maybe even died on this holy journey, the Pope guaranteed you'd go straight to heaven. For people living in a deeply religious age, terrified of hell and purgatory, this was an offer you couldn't refuse. He also dangled other carrots: adventure, land, wealth, and eternal glory. The crowd went wild. People started shouting, Deus vult. God wills it. The First Crusade was born. But right from the start, it wasn't just about faith. For landless knights, this was a shot at wealth and status they could never get at home. For kings and lords, it was a way to get troublesome, violent warriors out of Europe. For the Pope, it was a chance to unite Christendom under his leadership and gain influence over the Byzantine Church. The motivations were already a tangled mix. Now, the journey itself was a brutal reality check. Forget organized armies. The First Crusade began with a wave of sheer chaos called the People's Crusade. Led by a charismatic preacher named Peter the Hermit, tens of thousands of poor peasants, families, even children, set off completely unprepared. They had no money, no supplies, no military training, and no real plan. Driven by religious fervor and the Pope's promise, they marched across Europe. Starvation and disease killed many before they even reached Constantinople. When they got into conflict zones, things turned horrific. Desperate and believing all non-Christians were enemies, some of these mobs attacked Jewish communities in Germany along the way. These pogroms were brutal massacres, fueled by the twisted idea that killing Christ killers was part of their holy mission. This dark stain of anti-Semitism, tragically linked to the Crusades, was a horrific reality long before any Crusader army reached Jerusalem. It showed how easily religious zeal could twist into murderous hatred against anyone deemed other. By the time the remnants of the People's Crusade reached Anatolia, modern Turkey, they were swiftly and brutally destroyed by Seljuk Turkish forces. It was a devastating lesson in how unprepared zeal led to disaster. The professional armies, the knights and nobles, arrived later. Their journey was no picnic either. Crossing deserts, battling heat, thirst, disease, and fierce resistance, they suffered terribly. But they were organized and heavily armed. Against the odds, and partly due to divisions among their Muslim opponents at the time, they actually succeeded in capturing Jerusalem in 1099. What happened next is one of the darkest chapters. After breaching the walls, the victorious Crusaders unleashed a massacre on the city's inhabitants. Muslims, Jews, and even local Christians were slaughtered indiscriminately. Streets literally ran with blood. This wasn't a clean liberation, it was a horrific bloodbath driven by years of hardship, religious hatred, and the dehumanization of the enemy. The image of these holy warriors, butchering men, women, and children in the very city they claimed to venerate shattered any illusion of pure, noble purpose. It showed the brutal violence simmering beneath the surface of the holy war ideal. They then set up several Crusader states along the coast of the Levant, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. These weren't just military outposts, they were European colonies run by a tiny minority of Crusader elites ruling over a large, resentful Muslim and Eastern Christian population. So, why did people keep going on crusades for the next 200 years? Jerusalem was captured, right? Well, holding on to those far-flung kingdoms proved incredibly difficult. They were surrounded by powerful Muslim states determined to push them out. This led to a series of major crusades over the next 2 centuries, each with its own story and motivations. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, was launched after the Muslims recaptured Edessa. It was a massive failure, collapsing before it even reached the Holy Land. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, is the one with the big names: King Richard the Lionheart of England, King Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. They went to recapture Jerusalem after it fell to the brilliant Muslim leader Saladin. Richard and Saladin became legendary rivals, but even with epic battles, the Crusaders couldn't retake the city. They settled for securing access for Christian pilgrims. This crusade showed how tangled European politics were. Richard and Philip hated each other and barely cooperated, and Barbarossa drowned on the way. National rivalries were often more important than the holy cause. Then came the Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204. This one is the ultimate example of how far the original purpose got corrupted. Instead of heading to Jerusalem, the Crusaders got sidetracked, manipulated by Venetian merchants who needed money, and ended up attacking and brutally sacking the Christian city of Constantinople. They looted its incredible treasures, desecrated churches, and tore apart the Byzantine Empire. The Pope was furious, but the damage was done. The crusade meant to fight Muslims ended up destroying the largest Christian city. It exposed the greed, political maneuvering, and sheer opportunism that had come to dominate the movement. Later crusades, like the Children's Crusade, which ended in disaster with thousands of kids sold into slavery, or the Crusades targeting Egypt, achieved little. The Crusader states gradually shrank until the last major stronghold, Acre, fell in 1291. So, what was driving people besides the Pope's initial call? Let's untangle the real motivations. Faith was absolutely real for many. The promise of spiritual rewards, forgiveness of sins, a guaranteed place in heaven, was a massive draw for ordinary people and knights alike. Pilgrimage was central to medieval life, and a crusade was seen as the ultimate pilgrimage, a physical act of devotion. But it was rarely only about faith. Land and wealth were huge motivators, especially for younger sons of nobles with no inheritance. The East represented opportunity, riches from looting, fertile lands to rule over, new titles. Merchants from powerful Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa saw massive profit. They provided the ships to transport crusaders, but at a steep price, and they gained valuable trading posts and monopolies in the eastern Mediterranean. Their influence often steered crusades towards targets that benefited their commerce, like Constantinople. Adventure and glory called to knights bred for warfare. Crusading offered a chance to win renown, prove bravery, and escape the boredom or poverty of home. Political power played a massive role. Kings and lords used crusades to enhance their prestige, unite their kingdoms against a common enemy, or get rid of rivals. Popes used crusades to assert their authority over kings and unite Europe under the banner of Rome. Sometimes, crusades were even called against political enemies within Europe declared as heretics. The crusading ideal became a powerful tool used for various political goals far beyond Jerusalem. And for many poor people, joining a crusade was simply an act of desperation, a chance to escape famine, debt, or serfdom, clinging to the hope of a better life, earthly or heavenly. The reality on the ground was a messy soup of all these motivations. The impact on the people living in the Middle East was devastating and long-lasting. For Muslims, the arrival of the Crusaders was a brutal invasion by foreign fanatics. The massacres at Jerusalem and other cities created deep trauma and resentment. While Muslim rulers like Saladin are remembered for their chivalry, he actually provided safe passage for Christians after retaking Jerusalem. The Crusades cemented an image of Western aggression and brutality in the Muslim world. The constant warfare ravaged the land, destroyed communities, and disrupted lives for generations. Eastern Christians, like Greek Orthodox or Armenian Christians, faced a complex situation. Initially hopeful for liberation from Muslim rule, they soon found the Crusader rulers often treated them as second-class citizens, distrusting them more than Muslims sometimes. The Crusaders imposed Latin, Roman Catholic, church practices, suppressing local traditions. The sack of Constantinople by fellow Christians during the Fourth Crusade was an unforgivable betrayal that created a bitter schism between Eastern and Western Christianity that lasts to this day. Jewish communities suffered terribly, not just in the Rhineland massacres at the start, but throughout the Crusades. They were often scapegoated and targeted by Crusader mobs fueled by religious hatred. The Crusades entrenched deep divisions and created legacies of distrust and hostility between the Christian West, the Muslim Middle East, and Eastern Christianity that continue to shape global politics and perceptions today. But here's a twist you might not expect. The Crusades also sparked incredible cultural exchange that profoundly changed Europe. Despite the conflict, Europeans living in the Crusader states, often for generations, interacted constantly with their Muslim and Eastern Christian neighbors. They traded goods, shared knowledge, and observed different ways of life. Europeans encountered things they had never seen before: advanced mathematics, astronomy, and medicine far surpassing their own, new foods like sugar, lemons, rice, and spices, luxurious goods like silk, cotton, and sophisticated glassware, new ideas about philosophy, architecture, and bathing. Muslim scholars had preserved and built upon the knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, works by Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Ptolemy, that had been lost or forgotten in Western Europe. Through translations often done in places like Spain, which had its own complex history of Muslim-Christian-Jewish interaction, or Sicily, or through direct contact during the Crusades, this flood of ancient and new knowledge began pouring back into Europe. This included revolutionary concepts like Arabic numerals, including the zero, algebra, advanced surgical techniques, astronomical tables, and Greek philosophy. This influx of knowledge was like rocket fuel for the European mind. It challenged old ways of thinking, stimulated universities, which were just starting, and laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. European castles started incorporating designs learned from Middle Eastern fortifications. Trade routes established or boosted by the Crusades brought immense wealth to Italian cities, fueling the rise of banking families and the economic boom that supported the Renaissance. Even the idea of chivalry and courtly love in European literature was influenced by stories and customs encountered in the East. So, while the Crusades were born of conflict, they accidentally ripped open a doorway for ideas and goods that transformed medieval Europe and set it on a path towards the modern world. The legacy of the Crusades is incredibly complex and still hotly debated. On one hand, they represent centuries of religiously sanctioned violence, intolerance, and colonialism that caused immense suffering and left deep scars. The word crusade itself, when used today in politics or war, can evoke those negative images of aggression and holy war, particularly in the Muslim world. On the other hand, they were a product of their time, a violent, deeply religious era where such expeditions made sense to the people involved. They also led to unintended consequences that reshaped Europe intellectually and economically. The Crusades failed in their primary goal of permanently securing Jerusalem for Latin Christianity. But they succeeded wildly in other ways. They dramatically increased the power and wealth of the papacy for a time. They strengthened monarchies in Europe. They accelerated the decline of feudalism as nobles sold land to fund their expeditions. They boosted the rise of merchant classes and banking, and, crucially, they exposed Europe to a wider world of knowledge and culture. They showed the incredible power of an idea, the crusading ideal, to mobilize masses across nations, for both good and ill. That power to rally people around a cause, especially one framed in moral or religious terms, is something we still see echoes of today, for better or worse. So, what were the Crusades really about? They were about faith, yes, but also about land, gold, power, adventure, desperation, and the dream of a better life. They were about popes seeking authority, kings seeking glory, knights seeking fortune, and merchants seeking profit. They were about deep-seated religious devotion colliding with brutal political reality and human greed. They were a collision of worlds that caused terrible destruction but also sparked unexpected connections. They weren't a simple tale of good versus evil, but a complex, centuries-long drama driven by the full spectrum of human motives, the noble, the selfish, the desperate, and the devout. They remind us that history is rarely black and white, but painted in shades of gray, and that events driven by multiple, often conflicting, desires can have consequences, both devastating and transformative, that echo for 1,000 years. Understanding the Crusades means understanding this messy complexity, recognizing the suffering they caused, the changes they unleashed, and the cautionary tale they offer about the dangerous mix of religion, politics, and war. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If this deep dive into the tangled reality of the Crusades gave you a new perspective, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe for more journeys into history's gray areas, and let me know in the comments what surprised you the most. Take care, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.